Revelation Unraveled, Part 14, The Great Apostasy, continued. Part W7, The Grievous Wound. And I saw another sign in heaven, great and wonderful, 7 angels having the 7 last plagues. For in them is filled up the wrath of God. And I saw as it were a sea of glass mingled with fire, and them that had overcome the beast and his image, and the number of his name, standing on the sea of glass, having the harps of God, and singing the canticle of Moses, the servant of God, and the canticle of the Lamb, saying, Great and wonderful are your works, O Lord God Almighty, just and true are your ways, O King of ages. Who shall not fear you, O Lord, and magnify your name? For you alone art holy, for all nations shall come and shall adore in your sight, because your judgments are manifest. And after these things I looked, and behold, the temple of the tabernacle of the testimony in heaven was opened. St. John uses the word beast here for the first time in our new ROC arrangement, St. John's cryptogram. Beast can refer to the later appearing beast from the sea, Antichrist, the beast from the earth, false prophet, or the beast from the abyss, the New World tyranny. Here in W7, the beast stands for Adolf Hitler. Hitler introduced the chief horrifying attribute of socialism, the mass murder of your own citizenry, a phenomenon that was perfected in the 20th century and has reached its peak today in the form of abortion, the mass murder of infants in the womb. It is significant to note the terrible effects of apostasy, because the demon-possessed Hitler was at one time a Catholic altar boy. The two groups of martyrs in this segment refer to the millions of Jews and Christians murdered in Nazi concentration camps. The former sing the canticle of Moses, while the latter sing the canticle of the Lamb, Jesus Christ. Hitler also anticipated the Antichrist by promoting images of himself which all loyal citizens were expected to adulate. I remember seeing countless movies of World War II in which mesmerized Germans salute huge portraits of Der Führer with shouts of Heil Hitler. We can deduce from the text that these Nazi images of the beast were not as soul-destroying as will be the eventual image of the Antichrist, because the penalty was not as severe. The sore and grievous wound symbolizes the military defeat of Germany. Later on, the penalty for worshiping the image of the final beast, the Antichrist, will be much greater. It will mean eternal damnation for individuals and annihilation for nations. By contrast, the punishment for subjects of the earlier precursor of the Antichrist, Henry VIII, was less than for those of Hitler: hail, blood, and fire. God's chastisement for the abortion crimes of capitalism, Babylon, will be worse. As the murder rate increases, so will the eventual sufferings of the perpetrators. And the 7 angels came out of the temple, having the 7 plagues, clothed with clean and white linen, and girt about the breasts with golden girdles. And one of the 4 living creatures gave to the 7 angels 7 golden bowls, full of the wrath of God, who lives forever and ever. And the temple was filled with smoke from the majesty of God, and from his power, and no man was able to enter into the temple till the 7 plagues of the 7 angels were fulfilled. And I heard a great voice out of the temple saying to the 7 angels, Go and pour out the 7 bowls of wrath of God upon the earth. And the first went, and poured out his bowl upon the earth. And there fell a sore and grievous wound upon men, who had the character of the beast, and upon them that adored the image thereof. God's punishments become more intense as mankind progresses into ever greater apostasy. St. John is warning us that the final chastisement will be exponentially worse, just as Hitler's was much more severe than Henry VIII's. On the positive side, the martyrs who overcome this forerunner beast, Hitler, are depicted in heaven. Later on, those who overcome the ultimate beast, the Antichrist, will gain the millennial privilege, returning with Christ for the 1,000-year reign of peace. Why has no one else ever interpreted these verses as referring to Hitler and Nazi Germany? First, because there was no ROC chart, St. John's cryptogram, to indicate the timeline for St. John's visions. Second, the author kept the descriptions obscure on purpose. Why? Because that tragedy did not have to happen. The Blessed Mother warned in 1917 at Fatima, if people do not stop offending God, another and worse war will begin. If the world had listened to Mary, World War II could have been avoided, and St. John's prophecies would have had meaning for only the very end times of the Antichrist.